Hey, what's up, everyone? So, I'm taking a quick break from the sketch and reviews since I have a few other projects coming up, a few of which I recorded and will be uploading later. For now, I want to talk a bit about cross hatching. This video won't be too long, and I promise not to ramble too much. Maybe. So, growing up, I was never really into shading or drawing with a pencil like most artists, and honestly, I probably should have started doing that technique. I sort of jumped straight into inking since I was obsessed with comic books and comic book style art. Not so much anymore these days, but as a kid, yeah, a lot of X-Men, Spawn, Wolverine, Judge Dredd. What else was there? I read a lot of Batman too. Alien, Predator. I think I have more Alien and Predator comics than pretty much anything. Anyway, one of the most popular ways to ink involved a technique called hatching. Not hatching like an egg, but hatching drawing wise. Hatching is when you draw a series of really thin or thick lines next to each other to give the illusion of shading. Early comics kept it simple and relied more on simple gestures and flat colors, along with big splotches of black ink to represent shadows. But throughout the 80s and especially the 90s, comic art got more complex, and artists like Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane went heavy on the detail. The technique they used is what you see me doing here, which is cross hatching, where you don't just draw lines going in one direction to create shadows, but you intersect them at varying degrees to add depth. So you mix that with dark areas to create depth, and you get the average look for most comics in the 90s. Now, they didn't invent cross-hatching. It's actually a style that's been around for a while. Oh, that rhymed. I didn't even intend that. And by a while, I mean since the dawn of man. Early cave paintings had cross-hatching. Yep, cavemen did what we do today. Well, for those of us that actually draw our own art and don't type words to have a computer make it, but I digress. Though, one of the most famous artists to really popularize the style that's still fairly known is Gustave Doré. Doré was born in 1832 and did some amazing work depicting scenes from the Bible and Dante's The Inferno. His work was transferred onto wooden blocks for mass printing, and if you've seen his stuff, it's still some of the most impressively detailed art out there. Now, for the history nerds, I'm not saying he's the first one to use this particular style, since artists have been doing it since the Middle Ages and before, but he did bring it more into the mainstream. I mean, look at this. How many black metal bands have used this for their album covers? Once I got older and started finding my own style, I sort of moved away from the comic book look and tried doing stuff a bit more intricate and darker. Doré was one of my biggest influences. I also learned more about proper cross-hatching from studying his work. So, there's a few different ways to approach it. A lot of beginners make the mistake of just drawing random lines or on object edges and making a mess of things without really knowing what they're doing. Think of it as a type of shading technique. You're going to have fewer, thinner lines where there's light shadow, more and thicker lines in darker areas, and those lines could overlap where there's extra cast shadow. Once you think of it that way, you'll have an easier time using this technique. And once you get those basics down, think about the form of what you're drawing. Is it a flat surface? Rounded? Jagged? To create a convincing illusion of shadow, you want your lines to follow the direction of that surface. So in essence, what you're doing is using line spacing and line width to create sort of an illusion of space, form, volume, and contrast. You want to make sure that when you're cross-hatching, to not overdo it and to not underdo it. Now, I may be overdoing some parts here and maybe not doing it enough in others, but I'm trying to pay attention as hard as I can to where the lighting is sitting. What you want to do is look at the form and particular tone of the subject or object you're drawing and follow that form. For example, since I'm doing my cross-hatching on a person, people don't really have flat surfaces on them. So I'm using as much line curvature as I can. That's not to say I'm not doing any flat lines or straight lines, which obviously you can say I am. But I'm also not going for hyperrealism. I'm going for something kind of between realistic and stylized, just kind of in my own style. I've never really done anything super realistic, except maybe if I'm kind of rendering something by rendering, by the way, is when you are looking at something and drawing what you're seeing. That's not called copying, it's called rendering. But yeah, with this I'm kind of applying different angles, different textures, and just making sure my lines are following, like if it's on her shoulder or on her arm, that it's going to curve properly. Other areas like the kind of deep inside of the neck where there's like heavy shadow, or kind of the clavicle, collarbone, and some other areas, I'm not really worried too much since I can use different lines at different widths and different angles to also give the illusion of curvature. That's another thing you can do. If you're not good at curving your lines exactly quite yet, you can just draw different straight lines at different angles over each other, but just keep in mind it is going to create darker areas and give the illusion that you are creating darker shadows, so kind of keep that in mind. Like with this drawing, yeah, I used some flat lines like on the areas around the dress and some parts of her cheek, neck, and hands. But on her chest, shoulders, and face, I'm curving my lines. Now, is it perfect? No, I'm not going for perfection. I'm just doing this for fun. But I'm still following the form and adhering to what I know about lighting and anatomy. And even if I mess this up, I can always do better on the next drawing. Now, for those curious of my settings that I'm using, I have my pen pressure set to dynamic, and the line width for the thinner lines is at 3 pixels. For the slightly thicker lines, I go to 5 pixels with the hardness at 100%. Now, there are preset brush packs that literally paste down crosshatch lines for you, but that's just lazy. Besides, I like doing this to build up hand-eye coordination and consistency. I can see where my hand drops off after a while, if my lines are uniform, if they're the same distance from each other, if I can control my line curvature, and so on. It's like exercise. If you don't work your muscles aren't going to work. I try and draw everything manually as much as possible when it comes to initial prelims. That is, I draw with a tablet how I would on paper. It'll only help you get better. That's not to say I don't use like the line tool or the rectangle tool or the magic wand, but the less I use those and the more I do everything myself, the more organic it'll look. Cross-hatching with my line art is honestly the best exercise I've found for keeping my skills up as an artist. The only reason I don't do it more these days is because, unfortunately, people don't appreciate that kind of work. In fact, I wasn't even going to make this drawing into a video, but I decided midway through to start recording it no matter how tedious it may be. So, I hope this helps whoever is looking to expand their art journey and maybe inspires you to try something new if this isn't a technique you've used before. Until next time, take care.